हेलो फ्रेंड्स, कैसे हो आप लोग? वेलकम बैक. माई सेल्फ पुष्पेंद्र सिंह and we are going to start with our daily current affairs. So today you have 1st of July 2021 and these lectures are basically meant for those who are preparing for the civil services examination which is conducted by the UPSC, and we are referring the two national newspapers, the Hindu and the Indian Express. For these news you can also read these two national newspapers which are very important for your preparation, and you can supplement your preparation with the help of these lectures also. So let's begin with the today's lecture. Okay, so first news is all about, you know, the information or the study which basically shows that the black carbon basically linked with some sort of a premature mortality or premature death. So here the most important study which was conducted specifically with respect to the Indo-Gangetic plain in India, which shows that the high burden of black carbon have shown the serious implications on the health measures of the people, specifically the human health. Okay, so the black carbon has also related to the premature mortality among the people. Okay, here what we are referring about is black carbon is basically a form of a particulate matter. Okay, that is basically emitted from various industrial sources. Okay, that results from specifically from the carbon emissions mostly associated with premature mortality. Okay, so that study basically shows that you know that different classes of the air pollutants specifically in Varanasi city, okay, in Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh. So here the study was basically funded by the Department of Science and Technology, okay, which is conducted by the researchers of the Indian Institute of Technology, Banaras Hindu University BHU, which have been recently been converted as a IIT. Okay, apart from that, a St. John's Medical College which is located in Bangalore, right, as well as the DST Mahatma Center of Excellence in the Climate Change Research BHU is also involved in the study. So here it appears that some sort of the premature death is also related to those black carbon. So this Indo-Gangetic plain, according to the study, has very high burden of the black carbon. Okay, according to the study, which have the serious implications on the basically on the health of the people, specifically in this region. Now further, the report or the study basically shows certain other complications related to the health measures. So here the most important aspect, the study basically also shows that the several cities including these Varanasi cities, right, routinely find themselves at the top of the list of the most populated city in our country, right, in the world. So here the black carbon results from the incomplete burning of the fossil fuels, right? Whatever you basically burn that fossil fuels, if you burn them incompletely, that releases some sort of a black carbon. And the studies also previously conducted on this, which is also related to the global warming also. Okay, so it is relatively short-lived. So it is a relatively short-lived, okay, pollutant in the atmosphere, but definitely influence the cloud formation or atmospheric heat absorption process. Okay, but here the most of the important pollutant that is based on some sort of a studies that previously conducted, that was related to the particulate matter 10, particulate matter 2.5, that is basically also a form of a particulate matter. So particulate matter 2.5 can inhale into your body, can go into your body and can basically disturb your the lungs, right? Particulate matter 10 can also be very injurious to your health. So here the all particulate matters are basically some sort of a toxicity as involved in that. So here the detrimental effect of these pollutants are higher, that have been found specifically among the males. So the study basically shows that among the males, which is in the age group of 5 to 44 years, right, the negative effect of this black carbon was more, right. They also found that this effect of this air pollutants are not limited to the current day of exposure, but it is basically having the repercussions all along, right, having some sort of potential health hazard, right, to all the classes of the people in that respect. Okay. Next you have the next news, that is the Marmara Sea. As you know that the Marmara Sea, over the few months, the Turkey's Marmara Sea have been facing a new challenge. So here they have some sort of an environmental concern specifically with respect to the Marmara Sea. So Marmara Sea, which connect, if you see the map of basically the physical map, this Marmara Sea basically connect, the Black Sea to the Aegean Sea. So that means the Marmara Sea is between the Aegean Sea one side and Black Sea to the another side. So it basically connect the two seas. Now, what is the problem with that Marmara Sea? The Marmara Sea is basically facing, some sort of a, the sea knot, that the blanket of the sea knot, okay, which causing some sort of an environmental concern. Now, what is that sea knot that we are concerning? The scientists from the basically Turkey and all across the world have studied this sea knot. This sea knot is basically a thick, a foamy layer of the marine mucilage, okay, that is basically formed, from the algae which is present in the water. So it's a thick form of a layer, right, which basically formed out of the algae which is present in the water body. Now what is happening is that if you have this thick layer, which is formed in the Marmara Sea, obviously the aquatic life will get affected, okay. The rays which penetrate into the water may not be able to penetrate, right. The sufficient dissolved oxygen may not be present over there, right. Aquatic life may be disturbed, they either deplete, or they may die, or they may move, or they may migrate, okay. So various implications may be there. So it was first reported in the Turkey in 2007. However, this current outbreak, which is very recent in this month, right, is the largest on the record. So C naught is very extensive, specifically in the Marmara Sea. So this mucilage, or the thick layer of this marine algae, is now covering the surface of the sea and now spread to almost 80 to 100 feet below the surface. You could understand that the below the surface, they are also affecting, the waters of the Marmara. So that is posing, the huge threat to the marine ecosystem, specifically in the Marmara Sea. Okay, so that is what is this Marmara Sea is basically in the news. Okay, next we have the nocturnal semi-slug. So recently the scientists or the researchers, right, they have found, some sort of a new genus or the new species. So Western Ghats have yielded the new genus or the new species of the nocturnal semi, the nocturnal, basically the semi slug, which is very new to the science. So it's a new species which have been recently discovered from the Western Ghats. So this newly discovered semi slug, which is basically having some sort of a glossy surface, or glossy grayish, surface, is also named as the Baradia embolianis, right. This Baradia embolianis having some names which is associated with it. I will come to that, but it has been named as the Baradia embolianis, right. The embolianis, the Baradia embolianis, the Baradia is basically, the Baradia have been taken from the name that is called the Baradgiri. The Baradgiri was a person, right, who have been basically involved in finding out of this specific species for the conservation of, this herpetofauna, in specifically with that respect. And this embolianis basically refers to the Emboli area. That Emboli area basically found in the Sindhudurg district of Maharashtra. So both names have been taken up in for naming this the same slug. Now it is also known as the grayish white colored the Baradia emboliensis, right, which is having some sort of a, the length is around 6.9 centimeters at most. Okay, so this semi slug which have been found specifically as in the Western Ghats, in the Northern Ghats, in the Central Western Ghats, and it's primarily endemic to the Western Ghats, and is primarily found in the natural forest areas, right, specifically in that region, Okay, this study basically was published, right, describe, all the study basically was published in the European Journal of Taxonomy, right. And what we have, done, or what we have named, is that this name of this species that we have just now we learned, that Baradia emboliensis. The Baradia is basically the name of basically, the person who was involved in finding out this species. So Baradgiri, right, and the emboliensis basically refers to the Emboli area of the Maharashtra Sindhudurg district. Okay, So that is what the name or the recognition of this species have been basically done with respect to this new species. So here this collaborators of those study which have been done, right, with respect to various peoples which have been involved in this study. So what is the semi slug? What is the semi slug? Why we are concerning about this semi slug? So semi slug is also called because their shells are relatively small, right? They have the shelly structure all around, and their shells are basically very small, right, in compared to the body, right? So with that shell often partly or often entirely covered by the extension of the snail's skin, okay, or the mantle. So in the new semi slug, the part of this mantle basically covering the shell lobes, right, which are also retractable. So the shell can be completely covered by the mantle or largely they are exposed. So what you can say that the semi slugs are basically, they are the shells, right, and their shells are basically relatively small in compared to their body. So what you call them, the shell are basically either covering the body or with the help of extension of the snail skin, or may not be covering the body, right, that we call basically the mantle. So in the semi slug, the part of the mantle basically covering these lobes which are retractable in that format also. Okay, next you have the India's the non-performance assets, right, have risen to 11 to 12% in the financial year 2021-22. That has been noted by the global rating S&P. Okay, so the stress assets of the Indian banks will remain elevated to the 11 to 12% in the fiscal year 2022. Okay, it has been noted as a global rating agency S&P. Okay, and it's more important that this S&P also expect that non-performance assets or non-performance loans plus some sort of a restructured assets will increase to 11.5 percentage in the current fiscal year. That was basically at 11.7 percentage at the year ago, that means in the last year, right? So it is also expected that the bank's performance, right, would have already been affected because of the second wave of this coronavirus. So the second wave basically affected the front ended the asset quality of these banks. So financial institutions basically face the strained first half, specifically due to the weak collections as well as the poor disbursement, right, to the people, right? And here most important aspect is that the incremental bad loans will remain elevated in the current fiscal, as it has been noted by the S&P. Okay, and slowly the banks basically pick up, right, with the limit basically increase and the establishment of this bad bank, and the government emergency credit agency credit guarantee scheme would basically reduce the stress on this sector, as per basically report by S&P. And the S&P report basically also shows that the sector wise performance. So here the sectors like tourism, right, the recreation related sectors, the commercial real estate sectors, right, they have, according to the report, basically shows that such type of sector may contribute to the higher non-performance assets with the banks specifically, but the report further says that the bank systems are basically they may face this this type of stress, but only to the limited extent, right? But the government has to intervene in that respect in order to reduce this non-performance assets with the bank. Okay, and further S&P also added that banks are basically better prepared to bounce back from the second wave, right? But definitely the government has to introduce, or government has to incorporate various features, specifically various programs or various liquidity to the banks with that respect. Okay, and for example, many of these banks, they will be able to raise capitals last year, like you have the IDBI Bank, Indian Bank, they raised equity capital this year also. So none of the banks may see a bigger impact because of that. Okay, so global rating agencies basically expect a return on an average, the assets will be remaining as 0.7 percentage in the fiscal year of 2021-22, right, as similar to the last year, but an improvement of around 0.1 percentage can be seen in the fiscal year of 2020. Okay, so banks have already created the COVID related provisions of 0.5 percentage to around 1.5 percentage of the loans. So additionally you can say that the central banks have allowed the banks to use all other floating and counter cycling provisions to address these non-performance assets or these non-performance loans, specifically with that respect. Even the last year when the Reserve Bank of India's the financial stability report was published, right, that according to that report, the scheduled commercial banks gross non-performance assets ratio may increase to 13.5%, okay, by September, right. That was there in around 7.5 to 8%. So even Reserve Bank of India's in its financial stability report in the January-February, right, have also shows that around the non-performance asset may rise to around 13.5%. So that is what is happening. Around 11 to 12% of the non-performance assets with respect to those financial institutions are currently there. Okay. Next you have the Power Discom Reform Scheme. So here the Cabinet Committee on the Economic Affairs on Wednesday basically approved around 3.3 trillion power distribution company or the DISCOM, that is distribution company or power distribution company reform scheme. Okay, here the center share is around 97,631 rupees or crore rupees. Okay. Now here most important aspect is that the reform is basically based on the result linked power distribution sector scheme. Okay, and that will be applicable till 2025-26. That means it will be there, right, for the next 5 years as it was announced in the union budget that was basically you know as announced by Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman in the parliament this year. And this scheme or this power discoms reform scheme basically subsume other schemes, like for example you have the integrated the power development scheme, which is currently being running. So this scheme basically subsume this integrated power development scheme as well as the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gram Jyoti Yojana. So these two schemes will be subsumed under this power discom reform scheme. So here it's very important schemes, and the funds will be released to the discoms subjected to some sort of the reforms related milestone that the discoms may achieve over the period of the time. Here most important aspect is that the state run finance corporation, power finance corporation, as well as the rural electrification corporation would be nominated as a nodal agency for the implementation of this scheme. That means these two agencies will be implementing this scheme. And here most important aspect is that because of the COVID-19, as you have seen that Nirmala Sitharaman also announced the various relief package, right, towards some sort of a discom reform scheme. So here the schemes also seeks to improve some sort of a operational efficiencies and the financial stabilities to all discoms and the power department in that respect. It also include the private sector discoms, by providing some sort of a conditional financial assistance to the discom, okay, for strengthening the supply infrastructure in the country. So the assistance which is related to the conditional, some sort of a condition, right, or some sort of a the attachment with some sort of a the improvement in their own the working style. So this assistance will be based on the meeting of pre-qualifying criteria as well as achievement of the basic minimum benchmarks which are basically decided, right, as which should be achieved by the discom, right, on the basis of some sort of a agreed evaluation framework, right. Then only that type of the funding will be provided. So these conditional funding are basically associated with that the achievement of at least basic minimum benchmarks by the discom, right. And here this ambitious scheme will also try to bring down the India's aggregate technical and commercial loss, which is around 21.4 percentage. So you can understand that the aggregate technical and commercial loss is around 21.4 percentage. That much is wasted. Okay, that should be reduced to around 12 to 15 percentage. So here the Ministry of Power is also trying to reduce this technical and commercial loss to that respect. Okay, and that could be done, right, over the period of the time, and gradually this deficit may also decline over the period of the time, and it was decided, right, by the Ministry of Power to reduce ultimately that to zero by 2024-25, right. So definitely This reforms basically aimed at improving the reliability and the quality of the power supply, right, across all such, the country. So this scheme basically involved, some sort of a smart metering or improving the electricity supply to the farmers. It also include the smart metering to, a smart metering ecosystem across the distribution sector, right? For example, it is proposed to install around 10 crore prepaid smart meters by December 2023 within that scheme, right? And that scheme also have the component of providing the electricity supply to the farmers, that provide the daytime electricity to them. Generally in the village areas, you might have seen that the villagers basically got the electricity during the night time. So by reforming this DISCOM sector, you can assure that the farmers at least will get the electricity during the daytime. So definitely by installing the smart metering, right, by starting some sort of electricity feeders to the commercial, to the consumer level, right, you can basically reduce all losses, and ultimately that reduction in the losses will be able to supply those electricity to those deficit areas. And here most important is that the artificial intelligence, would also be leveraged to analyze, the data which is generated through the IT or OT devices, including the meters or the prepaid smart meters which are basically going to install. So okay, so that would basically, would have some sort of a, enable the discoms to take the informed decisions on the loan, on the loan, on the loss reduction, the demand forecasting. So it's very very important, right, for the purpose of introducing this artificial intelligence in the discom reform here in that respect. Okay, so that's all for this one, this news. Let's move to the next news. Okay, again black carbon could lead to the premature mortality. Here again the study basically again shows some sort of a other effect. So black carbon basically shows the significant adverse effect on the human health which led to the premature mortality as had been given by the study. Okay, this study basically help in the estimation of the future burden which is also related to the associated with this, the black carbon, right, which is also one of the important air pollutants specifically in the air. So here the most important aspect of the study is the Indo-Gangetic plain, which where the exposure of this black carbon is very very high, and that will have the serious implications on the health, specifically on the human health. So here most of the pollutants are basically, we have the particulate matter 2.5, particulate matter 10, which is basically having some sort of their toxicity, right. You can distinguish it with the help of scientific criteria, and you can basically, use other reforms specifically in other sectors like instead of coal based power plants, you can have, you know the renewable energy power plants or renewable energy sources, right. So that type of reforms is basically needed in order to reduce the black carbon in basically in the area, specifically in the Indo-Gangetic plain. You can also modify, the automobile sector specifically, so that can also reduce that type of, pollution specifically in that area. Okay, so typical urban pollution hotspot specifically in the central Indo-Gangetic plains, which are basically, these towns like Varanasi are experiencing very high aerosol, suspension, which is having some sort of a, very high prevalence of the subsidence, the ozone layer which is also found at the ground level, right, and which is increasing day by day. So that basically the black carbon aerosols are basically affecting, the human health with that respect also. Okay, the particulate matter concentration, particulate matter 10, particulate matter 2.5 is also, very toxic to the human health, and here the health is also associated with this black carbon aerosol exposure, which is also affecting the human health in that respect. So scientists from the Center of Excellence in Climate Change Research, right, definitely have come out to study the causes of the mortality as well as to study the ambient air quality from 2009 to 2016. Okay, which clearly establish a significant impact of this black carbon aerosols as well as other the toxic components or toxic gases like NO2, particulate matter 2.5 exposure specifically on the mortality. So here the inclusion of these co-pollutants, which are basically the nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter 2.5 in the multi-pollutant model, increase the individual mortality risk for this black carbon aerosols. So this effect of these pollutants are most prominent for the males as per the study, which is in the age group of 5 to 44 years, specifically in the winter, right? And they have found this adverse effect of the air pollutants which are not limited to the current day exposure, but also it will be extended to the day long also. Okay, next. A typical urban hotspot, specifically in the central Indo-Gangetic plain, is experiencing very high aerosol nowadays, and because of this high concentration of these gases in these areas, and it is due to the very high prevalence of this subsidence zone, right? Specifically with respect to this aerosol, the concentration as well as the black carbon aerosols which have been increasing nowadays have been also causing the significant changes in the mortality, specifically in the Indo-Gangetic plain. So here the inclusion of this black carbon aerosols, okay, is very important as a potential health hazard, and it's very important for conducting this epidemiological studies to provide the evidence of the health effect of the air pollution from the different parts of the country. Okay, so definitely the study could also help in the estimation of the future burden of this mortality which is associated with these air pollutants, and which can also help in the government to plan better model for reduction of this mortality across the country. Okay, next is the Apple air tax. So here the Australian regulator, which is also known as the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission recently, you know urging the parents of the children to keep the children away from this Apple air tax. There is some safety concern with this Apple air tax. Okay, so here, the Australian regulator, that is Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, urging the parents to basically to keep their children away from this Apple air tax due to the safety concern related to the battery, because such Apple air tags are basically run or they're powered by this lithium ion battery, right? What is this air tag? What is the air tag? See, air tags are basically the small Bluetooth based tracking devices. They are simple, the Bluetooth based tracking devices, okay, that can be attached to the keys or the wallets. Okay, so for example, if your children is basically going out, you can attach that Bluetooth based tracking device so that you could easily find out your keys or wallets wherever if you accidentally keep them, or if they have misplaced for that purpose. So what is happening is that these air tags button battery can be easily removed, the button battery, okay, and the compartment's lid does not always secure fully on closing in that respect. So as a safety precaution which have been given by the Australian regulator, that if it is allowed or if it is swallowed, what will happen, this button's battery can basically stuck in the children's throat, and there was various reports that this battery basically stuck in the children's throat and cause some sort of a chemical reactions that may also burn through the tissues, and that may cause in the extreme cases also deaths or the serious injury, right, to the ears, to the nose, that could also lead to the significant injury to that respect, right? As many as 3 children have already died and 44 have been severely injured in the Australia, right, because of these batteries in their products. So definitely the Australian Commission is basically concerned about the safety of the children, specifically with that respect. Okay, and the Apple also states that this air tag is designed to meet the international child safety standard. Okay, so here the Apple also gave the statement by by requiring a two-step push and a turn mechanism, right, so that it can be access the user replaceable battery, right, and it is working to assure that the product will meet and exceed the new standards with that respect. But the Australia basically introduced this mandatory safety and information standards in December last year itself. Okay, and this applied to all consumer goods which contain the batteries or button batteries, right? So this mandatory, the standards will be effective from this June 2022, right? Which will be applicable to all button batteries, specifically on the consumer goods. Okay. Next, you have the authorities lag against the fast evolving cyberspace threats. So that has been published in a report. So here the International Institute of the Strategic Studies, which is a UK based a think tank, okay, which is a UK based think tank, have shown in the report, in the 2021 reports regarding the cyber security. So the International Institute of the Strategic Studies, or IISS, basically basically segregating the countries, or putting the countries based on their cyber security and their capabilities. So this year the cyber capabilities and the national power was basically a theme for this report. So the net assessment was basically provided and rated these countries based on their cyber capabilities. But India has unfortunately basically received a very low rank. So this UK based think tank basically assessed the country's capabilities specifically with respect to the cyber security in the 7 categories. That is, first, that is strategy and the doctrine, the governance, command and control, the core cyber intelligence capability, the cyber empowerment and the defense, the cyber security resilience, the global leadership in the cyberspace and affairs, and the offensive cyber capability with that respect. If you see the report, what the report says that the India has placed in the 3rd tier. So it has been basically segregating the countries in the tiers. Okay, so India has been placed in the 3rd tier along with the Japan, Vietnam, Iran, North Korea. Right, the India has spotted in a very low rank. Right, according to the report, or according to the this IISS, right, which says that the countries which are there in the 3rd tier, including India, have the strength in some of these categories, but they also demonstrate some sort of a significant weaknesses in other criteria, right? So that means they are not able to cope up, right, with those cyber threats specifically which are originated from the outside the country, right? And the US is the sole country in the 1st tier. That means the US is the topmost country specifically in the report of the IASS, right, which is also included in the 1st tier of this cyber security and cyber safety, right? And where its strength are basically across all the 7 categories which are mentioned above, that I have actually explained you in the last slide. In the 2nd tier, which include the countries which are having the emerging countries, like you have the China, as well as the powerful country like Russia, Israel, UK, France, which are the countries which are involved in the 2nd tier. So here the reports also suggested some sort of a India specific the inputs. So it report suggested that the India's cyber intelligence reach is basically weak. Okay, it is basically centered all around the Pakistan. So the report says that India's offensive cyber capability is Pakistan centric rather than focusing on China. So it's a weak beyond its neighbors, and it has to be rely, or India is basically relying on the US as well as other European nations for the wider reach, specifically in this cyber security purposes. And the most important aspect of this report is basically the report further says that the governments all across the world are too often paying some sort of a very less the emphasis specifically in this cyberspace, right? And the cyberspace have become a most important arena, right, for defending the national interest in the basically in the contemporary world. So US remains basically the dominant cyberspace power. The China is basically gaining very rapidly the ground. Okay, and China could surpass, which is currently in the 2nd tier, could surpass the USA also in the near future, right? And it can become a major rival both in the civil and the military powers, right? Which is basically given in this report of IASS. So all countries which are still in the early stages, right, they have some sort of a strategic implications with respect to the cyberspace. So here a sense of crisis and the inadequacy was also existed in the 1st tier countries like India, okay, which is pervasive in such political circles, okay. And despite of rapid advances in the surveillance and the intelligence technologies, even in India, right, they are not able to cope up. They have yet to establish some sort of a legal and political framework for their use of the cyberspace. So the traditional structures of the government and corporate management and social organizations basically have come in the way of the countries like India to adopt some sort of a advanced cyber capability in that respect. So this report ultimately, ranks the 15 major countries into the three groups that you have seen: the first tier, second tier, and the third tier. Right? India is currently in the third tier. The US at the top spot, right? And which have, huge experience, around 25 years of experience and investment in the cyber capabilities. But China is basically recently in the second tier, is gaining the ground and rapidly making the success, right? As have done by the Russia, by the UK, by the Israel, and by the France also with that respect. Okay, so that's all for the today. Thank you very much. We'll meet again tomorrow for next current affairs. Thank you.